but I just saw this question probably about 15 minutes ago, and so I wanted to answer it the before the answer or the response kind of got away with me. So the question is, or the question was, in the Scoop Nation, how do you, or is it possible to repair relationships? And the question actually said between African Americans. I'm answering the question in terms of how you can, if it's possible to repair relationships, period, because in my experience, I get the opportunity to see broken relationships, not only in the African American community, but in all communities as well. So I want to address this from that perspective. So, all right, guys. So again, there are four things that I think that are necessary ingredients. These are not the only four things that are needed, but these are four of the things that if they're not present, we are not going to see relationships or any relationship restored. So first, let me take this and say, hey, Pamela, how you doing? Let me say that I believe that relationships, especially if we're looking from the context of divorce, the Bible says, or Jesus says, that it was never his intention for divorce to be something that happened, but it was the hardness of man's heart that caused divorce. So the first thing I think we've got to realize, what's up, Pope? The first thing we got to realize is that this is an issue that starts with the hardness of the heart. And when a heart is hardened, then what it does is it no longer is allowed to have good blood flow. So the way our heart works is oxygenated blood comes into the heart, and then the bad stuff is pumped out. Well, when our heart is hardened, the necessary flow or the bad thing, we're not allowed to get the nutrients that we need, and the bad things that we need out are not able to flow properly. So what winds up happening is we wind up getting, heart disease or congested, or or the flow where there's a restriction of flow. And so it's the same thing that happens in relationships. When our hearts become hard, then the things that are necessary for us to release are never released. And so because they're never released, what winds up happening is, again, it's just that we become toxic. Our relationships become toxic. Our communication becomes toxic. We're not able to hear each other clearly. And we're not able to really see each other's heart because we're looking at it from the perspective of our hard heart. So we cannot allow our hearts to get hard. So how do we, when something like this happens, how do we restore or how do we fix these relationships? What are some of the four ingredients that I'm going to talk about real quickly that are necessary to restore or to improve relationships? All right, so here we go. So the first thing that's necessary is something that is impossible to have when you have a hard heart. And that is, you have to have humility. Relationships cannot thrive when the environment is one where pride is ruling the land. So two people cannot in pride properly communicate. They can't properly with pride love one another, because pride is a selfish emotion, or it is a selfish thing, whereas relationships or love has to be selfless. So if we have hard hearts and if pride is something that is evident, or something that continues to control how we deal with each other, then we are never going to be able to successfully have relationships with one another. Think about it like this. So have you ever in your relationship gotten to a position where you were saying one thing, your partner was saying something totally different, but you couldn't even hear what they were saying because you were constantly defending constantly defending your point of view or your perspective without ever even really understanding what that other person was saying? That in itself has a root of pride in it because again, you put yourself in a position where now what you want and what you think becomes more important than what the other person wants and what the other person thinks, and that in itself is dangerous for a relationship. So again, the first thing you have to have is you've got to have, like I just said, you've got to have humility. All right. The second part of this recipe, excuse me, the second thing that is necessary is that you have to have, so I said you have to have humility. You have to also have courage. So what courage says is courage allows you to put yourself in a position to where you're willing to take risks that normally you would not be able to take. So again, if you operate in pride, or if you're not operating in humility, then you can't, you're not willing to take certain risks. So what do I mean by certain risks? What I'm saying is that what pride does, and what a hard heart does, remember, it not only it restricts the flow, but it also restricts the movement. So you're unable to do certain things, or to say certain things, or to allow access to certain places in your heart, because you don't lack the courage. So you're constantly saying, I don't want to put myself in a position to be hurt, because I can't afford to be hurt, or I don't feel like, I don't feel like this person, I don't want to be hurt again. And so when you do that, again, you restrict yourself from the access of having a whole and healthy relationship, because you refuse to have courage enough to say, okay, I'm going to allow this to happen. Is there a possibility, or is this the potential? Is there the potential for this to hurt? Yes, but because I have humility, because I'm humble enough, because I am, in a place where I know that that this is a possibility, I'm still courageous enough to say that because I want this relationship to work, it is worth the risk of saying I'm going to let that person in. So again, we said you need humility, you need courage. What's the third thing that you need? You need honesty. You cannot have humility, you cannot have honesty if you don't have humility, and if you don't have courage, because honesty then puts yourself once again in the position where you are vulnerable, and vulnerability can't reside, once again, y'all see how this is flowing, it can't reside in a hard heart, because then again, you are now, like I said, you're no longer going to restrict yourself. There was a quote that I like to use that says, that in the process of rebuilding the walls of your life, don't build walls that are so high that you lock yourself in from having relationships with other people. And so what literally happens is, when we are not vulnerable, and when we're not honest, what we do is we hide who we really are. We hide our true motives. We hide our true hearts. And so other people around us who could possibly help us heal or help us restore our relationships are locked out, because they only get to see what we allow them to see. All right. So you've got to have honesty in the relationship. You've got to have be so honest that honesty to the point where it creates a level of accountability. So you can't have a good relationship. A relationship can't be restored, or it can't be built or strengthened if there is no accountability. All right. And then here is the last thing. I told y'all I wasn't going to be long tonight. The last thing. So we said you've got to have humility. You've got to have courage. You've got to have honesty. And the last thing you have to do is you have to have and practice mercy. So mercy is a term that is often messed up and confused. We typically think about grace when we're trying to talk about mercy. So what mercy does is mercy literally says that you deserved this, but instead of that, I'm going to give you that. Okay, so you deserve for me to cuss you out because of what you said, but instead of cussing you out, I'm going to show you love that you don't deserve. And so literally, you have to, the reason this is so vital is because when you don't practice mercy, then communication once again becomes impossible, because now you're trying to go tit for tat. And every time you approach, you ever had let me give you an example. Have you ever had an argument or a conversation where you were honestly trying to resolve the situation, but every time you said, well, I did that because you did this. And then that person says, well, I did that because you did this. And then you respond with, but I did that because you did this. And so now we call that the tit for tat. The reason that you continue to stay in that space is because somebody refused to apply mercy to that situation. And even in discussing it, sometimes it becomes hard to resolve the discussion because, once again, you're trying to prove your point instead of saying, hey, you know what? I was wrong. And what I should have done is this. Please forgive me. And even if your a repentant statement is met with vitriol or is met with anger, sometimes in order for the relationship to work and to be restored, you've got to be the one to stand there and take it. Meaning you're not going to continue to play the tit for tat. You're not going to continue to say, well, again, in this situation, this person deserves me giving them a piece of their mind. But instead of that, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to love them, and I'm going to show them that the way for us to move forward is not for me to win this argument, but for me to sacrifice temporarily what I want for the sake of what I want in this moment, for the sake of what I want long term. Because my goal or my objective is to have a long lasting and loving relationship. And I can guarantee you when that happens, what happens is, first of all, let me say this. The reason we typically don't do that is because we want to make sure our point is heard. But the person who practices mercy and humility does not have to always be the person, will always be the person who in the end gets their point heard. Why do I say that? Because there is something that happens in the atmosphere. There's this wonderful thing that happens, that life has a way of showing the point that we need showed, even if we don't say it. So if we have a situation, and this happens in every relationship. So have you ever had a situation where your parents told you something a long time ago, and it might be 15, 20 years ago? I remember my father telling me, son, whatever you do, he used to always tell me, and he still tells me to this day, son, you got to practice. You got to practice hard. You got to practice hard, because if you practice hard, you'll be prepared when the game comes. He said that all of my sports career, and I hated listening to it. He was like, son, it's summertime, and you need to be out there swinging that bat. You need to be out there in the wintertime running laps so you're in shape. And I never did it. Well, there came a time in my career where, because I did not prepare, it might be something, it was in my professional career where I looked up and I turned around and said, oh my God, had I prepared better in this area of my life, then I would be further along. And I thought, oh my God, my father was right. He said that 15, 20 years ago, but because he didn't argue with me, because he didn't fight, and he let life bring it back, when it came back, I now understood. And so now, because of that, I'm an avid preparer in probably every area of my life, and over prepare. But be that as it may, it's the same thing in your relationships. We don't always have to win the argument. We don't always have to have the last word. Sometimes we need to just let it go and allow, again, life to bring it back. And when it does, I can guarantee you the lesson will be learned and your point will be made. So that's four of the ingredients that are definitely needed. Again, we've got to have humility, you've got to have courage, you've got to have honesty, and you have to have mercy. If those four things are present, I can guarantee you your relationships, and patience, of course. I would always throw in there patience. If you can allow patience to have her perfect work, as James says, then I can promise you that relationships, almost any relationship, can be restored. All right, guys. I hope that helped you. Hey, Raymond, what's going on, brother? I hope that helped you. I hope that really, really was something that was beneficial to you. And again, these are not just for relationships. They're for any kind of relationship that you go through. Professional relationships, personal relationships, marriage relationships. I say this as, and I'm going to give you my personal testimony, and I'm going to jump off. I tell you this as someone who has gone through the effects of hard-heartedness. I am, for those who don't know and are fairly new, I am divorced, married for 10 years, together for 14 years. We're divorced, and the divorce happened for those, if those things that I had just told you guys had have happened, had hard-heartedness not set in, then I can promise you I would be in a totally different position right now. I am grateful to God that He is able to keep me and to keep us, but however, I can guarantee you, totally guarantee you, that again, that if those things had been practiced by me, that I would not be divorced to this day. Promise you. All right, guys. So I love you. I appreciate you. Again, these are not just something I made up. This is something that I have lived. And I can promise you it definitely is the truth. All right. Love you guys. Again, if you hadn't shared this video, do me a favor on the bottom left-hand part of your screen. Hit the share button. If you have any comments or questions, please put them in. I will always go back through the videos and check out your questions and your comments and respond. And y'all have a good night. I told you I won't keep it long. All right. Love you.